Rugby Football Union. A sport for warriors. A sport that's played with a ball that some people consider to be an odd shape. A sport that often necessitates having a set. But not quite like that. Now this is a tale for the ages. The 1986 rugby match between France and the All Blacks, often referred to as the Battle of Nantes, is one of the most legendary games in rugby history. And that largely due to the indomitable spirit of one individual, Wayne Buck Shelford. On that day, Shelford would cement his place in rugby folklore for his sheer resilience, fearlessness, and unyielding toughness on the rugby field. It set the tone for one of the most brutal sporting encounters. It was a sunny, bright day in Nantes, France. The New Zealand All Blacks were playing against the home team in the second test of their tour. The French, known for their flair and unpredictability, had a history of challenging the mighty All Blacks, but this game would be different in so many ways, with Shelford emerging as the heart of the contest that saw brutality and brilliance collide. As the teams squared off against each other, the chants of "Allez bleu" reverberated around the stadium. The All Blacks, led by the very man Buck Shelford, who was incredibly proud of his Maori background, laid down to the hosts the challenge of New Zealand's traditional haka, a practice the All Blacks had started on their very first tour of the Northern Hemisphere in 1905. The French had already lost the first game of this test series, but they had no intention of letting the All Blacks get away with another win. Now remember, this is going back to the 1980s, and rugby union at that time was still an amateur sport. So certain things like drug tests weren't really part of normal practice. And as admitted many years later by the French team doctor of the time, Jacques Mombet, Les Bleus took full advantage of this lack of drug enforcement. Like a horde of deranged psychotic Spartans, the amphetamine-fueled French team was ready for war. French fly-half Franck Mesnel kicked off and the ball hung in the air. Dropping from the heavens, it was gathered by All Blacks lock Murray Pearce, who was then subsequently swamped by a collapsing blue wall of French forwards. Crash! Smash! Clash! Bump! Bang! Thump! Jolt! Whack! Knock! Slam! The impacts came fast and furious. On the 20-minute mark, Shelford found himself at the bottom of a ruck. For those unfamiliar with this particular part of the game of rugby union, I present to you the ruck as seen in the 1980s. And as you can appreciate, it kind of resembles a Wild West free-for-all. Anyway, back to the game. Shelford was knocked unconscious. His eye split open, and 3 teeth smashed out of his mouth. But do you think that would stop him? As if a huge vat of smelling salts had been conveniently placed under his nose, Buck got back to his feet. Slightly dazed, but ready to go. It became pretty clear to everyone in the stadium that Shelford was not a man to be beaten down. The game continued. At 3-3, the South African referee blew for half-time. Now was the moment to regroup, recharge, and get ready for what was to be a ferocious second half. And off they went again. "10 minutes into the second half, and Buck was again on the receiving end of French aggression, with a stray boot finding its way into his crotch area. Ooh, that hurt. Little did he or anyone else realise what damage had been made. As the game went on, the hosts started getting the better of their Southern Hemisphere opponents. And Buck, bruised and battered, was finally taken off. On the final whistle, the French celebrated a much unexpected 16-3 victory. The end of the game, however, was also the beginning. The beginning of the Buck Shelford legend. Back in the changing room, Buck undressed, when suddenly he heard, "What the fuck?" from one of his teammates. And I suspect some pointing of fingers and, I don't want to look. The most grisly and unwanted injury ever to be endured on a rugby field was right in front of them. Oh. Buck looked down. Not a pretty sight. Blood on his thighs. And ripped scrotum, and a testicle hanging out. So what did he do? Well, in his own words...
Quick shower, and then basically went upstairs into a medical room and got it all tidied up and put back together.
46 stitches, and an hour and a half later, Buck was down in the bar, enjoying a beer or 5. What a bloke. Buck Shelford's performance in Nantes wasn't just about the physical damage he endured, it was about the spirit he embodied. Rugby is often described as a game of fine margins, of skill and strategy. But in the Battle of Nantes, it was Shelford's raw, untamable will to keep going that was to be remembered most. He had become the very embodiment of All Blacks rugby, a symbol of grit, toughness, and the refusal to back down in the face of any challenge. In the aftermath of the game, Shelford became a national hero. His courage was discussed in pubs, newspapers, and living rooms across New Zealand. His performance on that day became the stuff of legend. And the Battle of Nantes is still talked about as one of the most physically intense games ever played in the history of rugby union. You see, Buck Shelford proved that some players don't just survive the battle. They emerge as warriors, unbroken and unforgettable. Well, that reminds me. I better put these away somewhere. Ugh. Just the thought of it.